Hi, everyone. This is Talk Back. I'm Sheila Horvitz, and I've been doing shows live streaming on the Facebook page of Channel 14 Norwich. They eventually go on the TV shows and are shown many times. They are also on my YouTube channel. And I've had the fortune to talk to people everywhere. And I'm so glad today for all our Connecticut friends, especially all our Hadassah friends, especially all our Colchester friends, of someone who is a native of Colchester, made Aliyah many years ago, and she's talking with us direct from Jerusalem, Barbara Sofer. Hi, Barbara.
Hi, I want to first give everybody greetings and blessings from Jerusalem, really with a prayer for good health for everybody from the city of Jerusalem, where so many prayers are sent out. We like to say it's not a long distance call here.
Okay, that's wonderful. Barbara, we're so happy and proud of you. I live in Colchester, Connecticut, and I moved there in 1970. We're going to go back and tell your story. So as I was moving in as a young mother, I got immediately, they volunteered me to be the Young Judea leader in Colchester. I immediately got involved with Hadassah, which I had been involved in as a young kid in New York City, in junior Hadassah even. But at the same time, our paths were crossing because you were graduating college and you were heading for Aliyah in Israel. So tell us about, first of all, your life in Colchester as you were growing up, because it's a very unique American city, small town, with wonderful Jewish roots. Talk about that.
Well, I think that it was a much smaller town back then. We only had 5,000 people, and we always knew whose car was whose. If somebody left the car somewhere, we knew that. There were no secrets in Colchester back then, as many people can attest to. And Colchester, as those who know the Jewish history of Colchester, there are two great barons in the world: the Baron Rothschild and the Baron Hirsch. And they decided that Baron Rothschild would invest very wealthy people in helping people settle in pre-state Israel. And Baron Hirsch decided that Jews would be successful farmers in the United States. And so there was a farming community in Connecticut. And when my grandfather came to the United States, he worked in the factories in the Lower East Side, and he was told, he got very sick. He was told he should go to a health farm. You know, people didn't have two pennies to rub together then. So he said, how can he go to a health farm? So somebody said to him, not a health farm, go to a real farm. You've got a cousin on a farm in Colchester. And so that's how our family got to Colchester. My late mother, was from New London. And my father, Abraham Slopak, went to have his taxes done with an accountant in New London. And my mother was then working for the accountant. My father saw her. That was the story. So she moved to Colchester, and we grew up in Colchester. My sister Charlotte, who also lives in Israel, she's a psychologist, and she moved later than I did. And I was very active in everything in Colchester. I went to Central School and Bacon Academy. I was the editor of the newspaper, and was involved in everything really in Colchester, the student council.
Okay. So your parents were Adelaide and Abe. Were those your parents?
That's
and you
correct.
had an aunt and uncle, Elaine and Leo?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Okay, and these are people that I knew in my years in Colchester, and they always talked about you, but you and I never really got a chance to meet because our paths just kind of crossed. So here you are in Colchester, you're graduating Bacon Academy. And what is your connection to Israel at that point? I know you're involved in Young Judea, of course, and we have to mention Libby Alpert, who was the leader of Young Judea for the entire state of Connecticut. And of course, you knew her well because she made Aliyah and she moved to Israel as well. So Barbara, tell us, what was there in your heart, in your soul, that made you leave America so early in your life? As you left college, you went to UPenn, right? Tell us about that transformation in your life? What happened?
Well, I would say that it was a long-term time in building. I was a member of Young Judea, which is a Jewish youth movement that is a Zionist youth movement, and it gives you a background about Israel. And my family my parents had been to Israel, so they were very pro-Israel. But when I went, my first trip to Israel was when I was a junior in high school, and I came back with no intention of living in Israel. I thought it was really great and an interesting place. But around April, I was on, we had a meeting of Young Judea of people who were deeply committed on the Salmon River. Now, if I ever tell people that in Israel, it doesn't mean anything. And I'm so pleased to be able to speak to an audience that knows what the Salmon River is, with the covered bridges and how beautiful it is. And as we were there, we walked along, and there was an emissary from Israel. And he said to me, what are your plans vis-a-vis Israel? I said, well, I was a senior, then when I go to college next year, I'll be involved in the Israel organizations on campus. And he made a disparaging remark to me. He said, oh, I thought you were serious. Here I was spending my weekends discussing Jewish and Zionist topics, and when my friends were having a better time, I think. And also, I was a very serious student. So he said no one says that in English, you're not serious. But, looking back on it, it's something from Hebrew. And I was so insulted that something happened to me as I walked along the Salmon River. I had a kind of epiphany. I felt that, why shouldn't I move to Israel? And I couldn't think of a reason. Why not? Our family had not gone through the Holocaust. They were already in America before the Holocaust. I wasn't a third-class citizen in an Arab country. My parents were wealthy, but they had enough money so they could visit me. It wasn't like I would never see them again. And that day walking, I said, okay, I'm going to move to Israel. I had kind of a vision of myself walking in the desert in Israel, near where Ben Gurion lived. And I never really turned back. I didn't think I was sophisticated enough to do it then. And I thought, I'll first, when I chose the University of Pennsylvania, they had a very flexible junior year abroad program. And I said, okay, I'll go on my junior year abroad, and then I'll kind of try out this desire that I have to see if it can work out for me. And that's what really happened to me, that everywhere I went, I felt that this is where I need to be. And so I went back, graduated quickly, and moved to Israel. And
that's a wonderful story. And so you did this on your own. You didn't have a companion, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, someone that you were going with. It was your own private, separate epiphany, as you put it, that brought you there. That's terrific. So now you graduated at the University of Pennsylvania. What were you interested in? Because you're a writer, you're a journalist. Now you are the director of public relations for Hadassah in Israel and internationally. And you write a column for the Jerusalem Post. When did you develop your interest in writing and in journalism?
Well, I was already writing in elementary school. I used to write stories and have my father type them out, and I would read them to kids in recess. And then in high school, I was for 2 years the editor of the paper. And at the University of Pennsylvania, I was on they had the Daily Pennsylvanian. We had a daily paper that came out 5 days a week, so you really had to be a reporter there. So I was writing really. I've been writing my whole life, and even in high school, I had a column I had it actually a column in the Norwich Bulletin, right? That's Norwich.
Yeah, that's the paper. Mm-hmm.
Right, that's the paper, and in the Hartford Courant, and I wrote features for the Hartford Courant even when I was still living in Colchester. So I've always been writing, and I'm still writing. The director of public relations, I write a lot. But in addition, I have I write books, and I have write magazine articles. I'm still writing all the time.
Right. We're going to get to some of those. I read a lot of your stuff, and we want to talk about that. But I want to go a little bit more through the trajectory of your life. So now here you are making Aliyah. What was it like? How did you feel? Was there loneliness? Did you have any regrets at any point in the time? And how were those first few years? What did you do?
Well, first of all, some who might not know the word aliyah who are listening to this program, aliyah means to go up. And the idea is when you move to Israel, it's kind of going up spiritually, certainly, not financially, but going up spiritually. So I had a great feeling of satisfaction actually from the beginning, and I made friends right away. Did I miss my family? Yes. But I felt really compelled to be there. And I felt that I was doing something important by living in Israel. And I enjoyed all the special aspects of living in a Jewish country. So in America, when you have a Jewish holiday, you fit it in. You fit it in because it's not the main culture. You take off a day from school or you go to synagogue. But in Israel, you're suddenly in the mainstream. That you're following this cycle of holidays that are in the Bible, and you can do that with your whole heart. And people are talking about subjects that are germane. So I had made friends right away, and in not such a long time, I got married also. So that I married Gerald Schroeder, who was a nuclear physicist and oceanographer, and a writer as well. He writes books as well. And we established a family. We met, we had a lot of friends who were other young couples building families. And we have large families in Israel. So we have the highest birth rate of any Western country. And so you're building your family and your career, whatever I wasn't lonely.
Okay. So you and your husband have 5 children, and how many grandchildren?
20.
Oh my goodness. I thought I was in good shape with 6, and you got 20. And they range in age from what year to what year?
The oldest is a senior in high school, and the youngest is not yet 1 year old.
Wow. And are they all living in Jerusalem or other parts of Israel?
They're all living in Israel, but they're not living in Jerusalem. I have two daughters who live in Jerusalem, and a daughter who lives in Rehovot, which is about 55 minutes away. A son and his family living about 30 minutes away, and the furthest is an hour and a half. So I'm pretty spoiled as a grandmother, being able to see my grandchildren under normal circumstances, but like grandparents all over, we're restricted here. Although now we're less restricted than you are in Connecticut.
Right. Have you always lived in Jerusalem, Barbara, the entire time?
Most of the time. For 3 years, we lived in Zichron Yaakov, which is on the coast south of Haifa. My husband was doing research in the fish ponds there, so we moved there for 3 years. And I had a small stint teaching in a development town. That's a town where, like on the periphery of life in Israel. When I first came to Israel, to something that I wanted to do before I got married.
And you went back to school in Israel, didn't you? You went to the Hebrew University. What did you do there?
Well, I had studied, you asked me what I was interested in. I had a general bachelor's degree, but I majored in English literature. So I did my master's in English literature. And then I took a course in leadership at the Hartman Institute. And I was back before I was married, I was back once at the New School to do writing and film course. And so I've had quite a bit of education. But in Israel, there's a lot of informal education as well, that one is constantly learning and discussing. And there's, a lot you have to do to keep up on things here.
Right. And when and how did you get connected with Hadassah in Israel? I know you were always connected with Hadassah, but when did you start becoming an actual employee of the Hadassah organization?
I was actually walking down the street, and a headhunter was walking down the other side of the street, and she crossed over and she said, "I've been looking for you." She said, in public, it's true. I said, I have a job in public relations going for Hadassah. And I said, I'm doing a fine job writing. I don't need such a thing. So she, like 3 times, she, kind of hounded me, at least go for the interview. So I went for the interview and I was offered the job. And I thought, oh, I'll do it for a year. And I committed myself for a year. I'll see if I like this. I kind of discussed it with my accountant. And, when you're freelance, you have kind of some better periods and not such good periods. He said, it's not such a bad thing to work for a salary for a while. So I said, okay, I'll do it for a year. And then the Intifada broke out at the hospital in the country. And half the terror, the Intifada is the time of terror. Intifada is actually an Arabic word that was it's a dog shaking off fleas, but it was the term that was used for the violence, the terror that we had from 2000 to 2005. And there, half the terror victims in the whole country were at Hadassah Hospital. So I had the opportunity to write their stories and to be able to work with some of the top tier news groups in the world, like 60 Minutes and Nightline. They all came to the hospital, and I served as their connection. And in that kind of transition, partly to doing media and film. And I watched what they did, and I kind of learned on the spot. And had a lot of success with that, and I'm still involved with that, and that's a very important part of my job.
Sure, that's great. So, when you first got to Israel, you lived through the Yom Kippur War, right? And you got to see Golda Meir in action. Talk a little bit about that and those experiences.
Well, you asked about loneliness. I think that I was kind of a trial by fire. That when I got there, and I was, just as a single student, and there was a real war, a war in which we were at the beginning in very bad shape. I had another job selling appliances, so I would sometimes get my salary in appliances, and I actually had a TV, black and white, but I had a TV, and every night people would come to my apartment. I lived in a basement apartment, and all my friends would come because I had the TV, and we would try to figure out what was really happening. And, it was the first time I had to go to a shelter. It was the first time I realized that so many of my friends could have been killed who were called up. And it was a very, very dangerous war with terrible repercussions. And I volunteered then. I would go out to the kind of rest and recreation homes before soldiers had, they were between operations, or they would be after and recovering, and I would kind of provide a program for them. And it was a way, I think, a bonding experience with Israel. When you've been through a war here, and unfortunately we've been through quite a few, it changes you. Changes you in some way. It makes you more serious. It makes you, I think, a little less joie de vivre, right? And you almost lost it. We almost lost everything in that war, and it was a sobering period for us here.
So, I read a lot of your articles, Barbara, and one of them kind of relates to what you're talking about now. So I want to go to it. You wrote an article about Israel's anguish is too little acknowledged. And you talked about the historical feelings about the Holocaust and other things that Jews feel. But you said, this is a quote, and I want you to talk about it. You said, personal experience is more powerful than historical consciousness. Tell us about writing that and what you mean by that, because I was very moved by that article.
I think that you live history here. Right now the whole world is going through a difficult period. So I think people can relate to that. I think that if somebody asked you what it was like to go through a pandemic, you could read about it before, but there's nothing like having to experience it, and people experience it at different levels, and afterwards you have that as part of who you are, because our lives are so intense here, because we live among so many. You mentioned the Holocaust. We have the most number of Holocaust survivors here. We live among people who have very difficult histories. who have, when we have a Memorial Day, it's not just a picnic. We do have a picnic, but before that we have people stand up in synagogue and mention their loved ones who were gone, who were killed, or and almost everybody has someone, so that we're experiencing that, and it certainly impacts how we feel about the world. So some people think, well, why don't they just give back, make compromises, and so on and so forth. It's not easy. It's not easy to do when you've already. It's not something theoretical. It's something that impacts your life. I was back in Colchester for my 50th. Sounds impossible, huh? My 50th reunion, and there I met people. Wow, it was amazing. I hadn't seen them for 50 years. It just seems like an impossible number. But I felt very close, actually, with my classmates who had served in Vietnam. Now, when I was in college, we were there protesting against Vietnam. But they felt a closeness to those of us in Israel who have gone through war. And I felt a closeness to them because they knew it. If you've been in the army, you also have that close. It's not historical experience. It's experience of facing life and death, walking down the street, not knowing if you're going to be blown up. If it's going out to fight, it's bringing up your children and knowing that they're on the battlefield, waiting for those phone calls. So some of it is sobering. On the other hand, we have great satisfaction living in Israel. If you look at the statistics of how happy people are, how satisfied they are living in Israel. Oh, we're big complainers here. You shouldn't think not. But deep down, people feel very proud of our country, and people feel very satisfied to be living here. And it's a meaningful life.
Yeah. So your article just pointed out that anguish is a never-ending sense that is overcome every day by what you say is the joy. And you're right. I've read articles that show that the Israelis have a very high happiness quotient compared to other countries in the world, which is interesting because, as you write, there is that anguish underlying everything, that sense of we don't know what's going to happen next, but yet you are able to manage and live life and live it joyfully in many ways. So that's a wonderful thing that you sense when you're in Israel. Now, I want you to talk about Hadassah now in the hospitals. You've been there since the 70s. You've been there for 50 years. And I just want you to describe for our people back here in Connecticut and in the U.S. who might be watching, what you saw as the progress over the years of Hadassah's work in the hospitals and the medical staff and the university, the medical schools, things like that. Would you describe that, the progress that has been made over all these years?
Yeah, well, I want to say, first of all, that it's not obvious that we should have one of the outstanding hospitals in the world in the Middle East, because the healthcare in the Middle East is not famous for being wonderful. But in Israel, it is. And that's really the contribution of Hadassah. And here we have to understand that all those people who are Hadassah in the United States created Hadassah, which created the medical system in Israel. So that we have American Jewish women who understood the need for medical care. And they started out really over 100 years ago. Think of it, those are our grandmothers or great-grandmothers who understood that you couldn't have a modern state without modern medicine. And so they didn't have checkbooks or credit cards, but they sold cakes and they opened up thrift shops, and they were able to send two nurses in all the way back in
1912, 13, right?
1913. Hadassah was established in 1912, and in 1913 they sent two nurses. Back then, most of the children had flies in their eyes. So that sounds, it's 100 years ago. But if you go to third world countries today, you'll see the same flies in kids' eyes. It's not as if kids have people don't have trachoma anymore. Millions do, but we don't have it. In fact, we have the one of the top teams in dealing with macular degeneration. That we're talking about eyes. And all of us could get macular degeneration. And there's no cure, but they're working on it with stem cells and making a lot of progress in Israel. Or my sister, whom I mentioned, had to have a secondary corneal transplant. Now, if you look that up, you'll see that people don't like to do a second corneal transplant. My sister had an eye disease, and people may remember my sister Charlotte always had thick glasses, and she discovered that she had an eye disease. And when she was a psychologist in New York, she had eye surgery before she came to Israel to live, and she got two corneal transplants. Back then, also, she was advised to do it in New York because we weren't as advanced. But now we're the #1 center in the world with those corneas got old, her corneas got old, the replacements, replacing those corneas. And we don't even need a whole cornea. It's only a small piece of the cornea that you need. So that she had that surgery recently. And frankly, I think she sees better than she did when she was at Bacon Academy. She still managed to be the valedictorian of her class, but she had to work hard to do it because of her eyes. But now she can see much, much better. And that's something that I've seen. And I think the internet has made an enormous impact for doctors and nurses in Israel, because suddenly you're part of this international community. Suddenly you're able to, you're not only on speed, you're 7 hours ahead of the East Coast, and you're involved with people all over the world. And we're able to have a really advanced medical center. A month doesn't go by. It's often twice a week, I get inquiries from people in the United States, in Canada, in England, in Germany, people from all over the world who have advanced medical center, want to know what the doctors in Israel, can they get a consultation with the doctors at Hadassah? So that makes us really proud. The doctors are very smart, very hardworking, and almost all of them do research. So they spend many hours a day doing research and working and doing their regular job in the hospital. And when we have a terror attack, they're all there. We don't have to call them. Everybody is there, and we're not happy to be experts in that, but we are, of course.
Right. And the other thing that Hadassah is almost famous for is whenever there's a disaster in the world, they're often first on the scene, bringing their medical equipment, bringing their doctors, bringing their expertise, training other people on the ground to do the right thing. And Hadassah is known for that. The hospital is known for that too, right?
Absolutely. We're always first to send, and when we can't go there physically, then they do a lot of consultation on WhatsApp, so that even in during the war in Syria, people, Syrians, we were quietly seeing Syrian patients who came, but of course we couldn't publicize that because the mothers who would come with their sick kids could get in trouble for coming to our Israeli, and we would take care of them in the hospital. But also, they're still every day they get questions from all around the world, and the doctors are still doing consultations, even though they can't go there to help now. But I was in Ethiopia 2 years ago for a team that was they're not advanced enough to do back surgery for children, scoliosis in Ethiopia. And if you're in a third world country and you have such terrible, totally bent over backs, then you're going to get, it's going to impact your lungs, and you're going to get pneumonia, and you might die from it. So that we had a team, and I went along with it. I went along partly because my son was the doctor who really organized it, the back surgeon. And I wanted to see him, but also I could report it for Hadassah. And it was really moving to see how these doctors took a very simple, I don't like to use the word primitive, but a very simple operating theater, and prepared it to do the most complex surgery. They did it without air conditioning. They did it for many hours there. and they were able to bring modern medicine to a third world country and to show the doctors and nurses how to do it. That's another important part.
Right.
That's also
Let's
very
talk about right. Let's talk about the COVID-19. You written a couple of articles that I enjoyed reading, and one of them was about on the front lines of battling COVID. It was about prepping a patient for a cesarean section who happened to eventually test positive for the virus, and how Hadassah Hospital got her ready for her birth. Do you remember that story that you wrote a few weeks
I
ago?
do indeed. I do indeed. Like everybody in the world, we had to face rather quickly um, the coronavirus, and the first Israelis to get it were on a cruise ship near Japan, and we sent a doctor from Hadassah to check them and make sure that they were getting the proper treatment. So we were a tiny bit ahead of the game there. We were prepared for it. But what are you going to do, first of all, when you have a pregnant woman who probably is positive and she has to give birth? So we were ready for it. We had a special room, and our nurses in Israel, you're done by nurses, by midwives. Our nurses were ready, and they were a little bit nervous. In fact, one of the nurses who was supposed to be on was older, and a younger nurse volunteered to take her place, a younger midwife, because younger you have less chance of getting a serious case of COVID-19. And they delivered this woman's baby. Meantime, they tested her. We have tremendous testing capacity in-house at the hospital. And she had it, and her husband had it, but the baby didn't have it, and the midwives didn't get it. And she couldn't go. Days we have a circumcision ceremony, a bris brit milah on the 8th day, and neither parent could go. We had it at the Hadassah Chagall windows in synagogue, and the midwives went instead. The midwives were with tears running down their faces, were there to, and they videoed it for the mom and for the dad who were on live videos to see it. And we had all the pregnant women in Jerusalem who had COVID-19, all of them, and they all gave birth successfully at the hospital, and no midwife caught it, and no babies caught it. So that was a wonderful achievement that we have. Again, we have a high birth rate, so we have a lot of people giving birth, and it's the most modern kind. But again, midwives are in the lead there. So hats off.
That's a wonderful story. And then you also wrote another article about sheltering in Jerusalem with the COVID-19, and I want you to describe it. You talked about in your neighborhood, people celebrating Shabbat by talking through their balconies to one another and so forth. Why don't you give us a flavor of what you wrote in that article and what it was like on a Shabbat during COVID-19?
Well, I can tell you that they've opened up their synagogues, but they're limited how many can go. And we, as seniors, my husband and I, haven't gone back to synagogue. So what happens? At first, everybody's in a bit in shock, and they close the synagogues, and people start to get creative. And they have from one building to another. You need 10 persons for a prayer quorum. Then people organized it, and they went out on their many homes have porches, front porches, balconies, and we don't. But we opened up our windows. Actually, took the windows out of there so we could hear fine. And down below, people came down below from other buildings. And there we have the services with everybody participating. There's even a Torah scroll in one of the apartments so that people can read the Torah. During the week, if you can't hear, you can call the person who's leading the service, and then you can have it on your cell phone when there's some traffic during the week. But on Shabbat, when people aren't using it, and there's hardly any traffic on our street on Saturday, you can hear the whole beautiful service. And on Friday night, very beautiful Friday night services. And we enjoy it in our homes. We don't even have to go out of our own homes to take part in the synagogue service. And this is an important time for prayers. We're all of us, all over the world. It's a shake. Everybody is shaking. Things are going on. The world, we know we're following the news in the United States, and we really feel this is we want to reach out, that this is such a time of uncertainty that it's important to connect with your spiritual side.
Well, that's important because you're doing some work with that and you're working on a book about that. Before we get to that, I just want you to tell us a little bit about the books you have written. You wrote a book about Israel for kids and Kids for Israel. And then you wrote a book, Shalom Chaver, I guess, about Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Just talk about those for a minute.
Well, so I've written both children's books. I've written children's books, tour books, fiction and nonfiction. So I think the first book I wrote when my kids were little was about a mouse in a Jewish household through all the different holidays. It was a way to introduce it. And that was the first book I wrote, and I wrote for kids. And then I wrote a travel guide for when my kids were little. And then it was published again later. We sent out a second edition. We did a second edition called Kids Love Israel, Israel Loves Kids. And you can see, today, many of those people are buying fewer books because they rely on the internet. But it's still nice to have a tour guide, a good book. But I gave instructions for sort of how to tour successfully with kids in Israel, not only the sites, but how to manage it with the heat and the other issues. And then I wrote a novel that was published by Dutton and called The 13th Hour. And I'm actually working on a sequel now. That was a suspense novel, an adult novel without going into details, certainly not a children's book. And actually still selling. And my most recent book, I'm going to go into all of them, but my most recent book was a book I wrote with a Holocaust survivor called A Daughter of Many Mothers. And I wrote that with Holocaust survivor Rena Quint, a woman who was in the Holocaust, lost her mother earlier than her father. And she was a child alone, a beautiful child alone in the Holocaust. And good women stepped forward to mother her. They were often killed afterwards. And one good woman after another helped her. So finally, someone took her to the United States, a woman who had lost her own daughter. And that woman died. And there she was left. There she was alone in the United States and had a tryout. You can read it in the book. It's called A Daughter of Many Mothers. Had a tryout with a family who decided eventually to adopt her. So she's now a great-grandmother living in Jerusalem. She's the premier English speaker because she lived in America so long for the Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem. And in writing it, I felt it was important to do that to bring her story and the story of the Holocaust in a way that people could understand it. And to talk about memory and psychology and so on and so forth, and how these things impact us. Those are subjects that interest me, and I think people are interested by them. You can get it on Amazon.
Sure, I'm sure we're gonna get all your things on Amazon, of course. Where else? Amazon. And you mentioned spirituality in the book you're writing. So this seems to be something that was developing in your soul the last several years. And talk about how you've become involved in a more innovative synagogue system and so forth. Why don't you discuss that, Barbara, and your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm lucky that I live in Jerusalem, because in Jerusalem, people are quite serious about religion, and women too. And part of it is that it used to be that it's to study religion, really to study the Bible, to study the Talmud, you needed to be a man, because there weren't courses available for women. But over the last 2 decades, in those decades in which I've lived in Israel, many opportunities for women to become more knowledgeable in Judaism have been developed, serious programs. And at the same time, in parallel, Orthodox women have asked to expand their roles in synagogue life. Now, it's not that, in an Orthodox synagogue, women sit behind a partition. And it's not very interesting, actually, because all the action takes place in the men's side. And it's not only not interesting, it's not necessary. So, because if you really look at the laws deeply, and then you see that women can take part, and there are many parts of the service that they can take part in. I mean, just to give a Torah talk when we have extremely knowledgeable women, so that when a synagogue like that, the model synagogue for such, called Shira Chadasha, opened in Jerusalem, I walk there, and it's a bit of a walk. It's about 20 minutes, not bad. The weather here is very good. And I started to take part, and it really suits me very well that the women's side, the real change is on the women's side of the partition. We still sit separately, but we don't sit quietly. And we're very much part of the leadership and part of the activities of the synagogue and part of the service as well. So it has become, that's our synagogue has been a model for synagogues, Orthodox synagogues around the world, where people have, don't think that women need to be hidden.
Excellent. So this is all part of what you're writing in your new book on spirituality. Is that going to be a part of it?
Well, it's everything that I write will be part of it, and some of it will be part of the things I've written in the Jerusalem Post over all these years too. But in the project that I'm working on, in more determinately now, is really the sequel to the novel that I wrote back then, and I'm doing the spirituality in pieces. So that's
I read so many of your articles, or at least the summaries of them. Do you have any favorite you write a column for the Jerusalem Post almost weekly. Do you have any favorites? I've listed so many that you wrote about. You wrote about the biggest building that Jerusalem is going to have a new skyscraper. You wrote about a young boy falling off a roof and surviving. You wrote about the palliative care centers for kids at the hospital. What are some of your favorite stories that you've written about in your articles? And how do you get your ideas? Do they come to you the night before? Are you writing them on deadline, or do you have them listed way in advance, the things you want to know?
I wish I had them. I wish I had them list way in advance. It's really a challenge. The challenge of looking at, we used to say, a blank page, a blank screen, and wanting to know where they are. And when you write a column for a newspaper, you have to be on time and you have to get it there early. And I don't like columns that are always the same. So I try to vary what I write, and I'm allowed to write more or less whatever I want to write, but I try to make it interesting and to polish it. So that, but I would say that my favorite article of the last year was an article I wrote that came out in Hadassah magazine about going shopping with a friend in America. Because you asked, I think this is, kind of a good way. It's not as if I've lost touch with my friends in America. And I have a good friend who lives in Philadelphia. And I met her when I was in university, and we've kept very close contact. She's come to Israel, and we know each other's kids, and so on and so forth. But very often when I'm speaking in the United States, I want to get together with her. And we've tried different formulas for getting together. And what we found worked really well was going to Macy's in New York, the giant store, getting a personal shopper, because it doesn't even cost anything. You get a gigantic room to try on things. And sort of spending the day, zipping each other up and catching up on things and discussing life issues, family, philosophy. And that article, I think, said a lot about growing up and living apart from part of your family and friends. And that's something that, and appreciating those old friends and
I read
appreciate,
that article. Yeah.
yeah. So that,
Bar-
I would say, was one of my favorites. And every year on Israel Independence Day, I write, according to the number of years that we exist now, we're 72 years old in our country. I write a column called Things I Love About Israel. And that's the most popular column that I write every year. People wait for
yeah.
it to see. So,
I want to go through some of those things, but on the article about Macy's, I love that article so much because it's something that you want to connect with friends, and it's like a same time next year type of thing. And the friendship never gets old; it's always there. But are you aware, sadly, that one of the things that happened in our protests in New York City the other day was they they vandalized Macy's. They went to the big store that you love and they vandalized it. That was so sad to see. Did you hear about that in Jerusalem?
no, I didn't. I'm surprised my friend in Philadelphia didn't tell me she
Yeah,
about that, how upset it would be,
yeah, that
upsetting it
was,
would be. But
yeah, yeah.
I, I
Well,
was I was glad to hear that Macy's would be reopening, but till we get on those airplanes again, it's going to be a while.
right, right.
Not
So,
that we like to shop either, right? We do talk.
yeah,
You and I do talk. I spoke to her the other night, but the it's not quite the same as being there together in such a shopping together. Um, uh,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
So on the 73, you do every year on the anniversary of Israel's founding. So now it's 72. You always add one more. I want to just start with the one more because then we can talk about some of your favorite others of the 72. We're not going to list them all, but so your 73 is, which I love, no matter where I'm returning from by plane, the sight of the Israeli coastline thrills me, right?
Yes, it's true. It's love. It's love. There's nothing when I come back, and I'm so glad. I'm so pleased. I'm so proud that we have a Jewish state and that I live there. I mean, how amazing is that? For how many generations did we say next year in Jerusalem? And I have to pinch myself. I live there, and I get out of the airplane, and if I have taken a taxi, I say Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. And as we go up to Jerusalem, first I see that Hadassah sign, and that makes me happy. And I see the sign to Jerusalem, and and I actually live there. And I'm so really so proud of the state that we've built.
Wonderful. Do you want to list a couple of the other things that are the great about Israel and why you love it so much? Give us a couple. You don't have to go through all
Well,
72.
I don't have it in front of me, and to tell you the truth, I haven't. You have it in front of you, and
Oh, I have it in front. Let's see.
I haven't memorized it. I could still do a few. I can do the Gettysburg Address, I think, but I don't know my articles by heart.
Well, I have a couple. You talk about the great baseball team that Israel has, and they're going to be in the Olympics. You talk about a brand new skyscraper that's going to be taller than the Freedom Tower in Manhattan. You talk about how fertilization in vitro is covered by health insurance and how great it is that Israel is a country that has universal health insurance that we don't even have in America, right?
Yes.
You talk about an
I want
Auschwitz survivor.
I want to just point out, because some people should think that's for everybody, Jews and Arabs, that
Everyone.
sometimes that all this wonderful health is only in Hadassah Hospital. We have our patients are totally mixed, our staff is totally mixed, everything is mixed. We live a really integrated life in Jerusalem. And that's, I think, a very important point. Some people think we live in some kind of a separate world, but it's
right. You talk about an Auschwitz survivor celebrating her 104th birthday. How great is that?
With how many?
You talk about how in Jerusalem, the city hall volunteers call every senior to see how they're doing. You talk about all of the wonderful technological advances. People know that WhatsApp and Waze came from Israel, right? The inventions there.
Yeah, well, I don't actually. WhatsApp came from a Russian Jew who went to live in America, and he was so poor that he had went on welfare, and when he got his big check, he also got it at the welfare office. He always felt bad that he had to take welfare. So, but that was we have, the tremendous privilege of having so many Russian Jews who moved to Israel and who have contributed to building our country. I am sure people who were watching the show remember how we would set our Passover Seder table and have a place for a Russian Jew because they couldn't get out, and how we marched. One of my great experiences was marching in Hartford and leading a march to free Soviet Jewry with the support of our wonderful senators and governor in Connecticut. So that little did we know that our neighbors would be we pray for the return of all the Jewish people to Israel. And we, when all the Russian Jews came, we felt that this was really a fulfillment of our prayers, and of our history. But though not all of them came, but we have many inventions. You probably couldn't turn your computer on if you didn't have Israeli technology inside. And most of the big companies have research and development branches in Israel, and they're very active, the research and development here, that people seem to be thinking of new things all the time. And some people think that comes because in the army, there's a mode in you go to the army that they don't want to repeat yesterday's mistakes. You want to change quickly. But I think that people come with a very big innovative idea, and people aren't so much afraid of failure here. Yeah, so you failed, you start again. And that's kind of the attitude in Israel. And it's very helpful when you're developing technology.
That's great. So Barbara, we could go through all 72, but we're not going to do that. People should go to the Jerusalem Post website, and they can find your articles there, as I did. They can read them all. They can summarize them all and get an idea of the life that you've been leading and what's been happening. So this has been terrific seeing you on our live stream.
I want to just say, though, for those who want to hear some inside emotional Hadassah stories, on the 28th, I'm going to be speaking again all the way. I don't know if it's Zoom or another kind of platform, but I'm going to be speaking as the speaker, coming with new and different stories that you haven't heard. And I hope that everybody will come. If you're a member of Hadassah, if you're not a member, then you better join Hadassah, because you could be the proudest person in the world for all the achievements. And this is achievements of American Jewish women who have made this happen. And Israel's achievements, you go back on the CVs of all the people who are great achievers, and you'll see Hadassah there. There are people, so many of the great scientists got their starts at Hadassah, Nobel Prize winners. So that this is our way. People want to know, what can you do? You feel helpless, you can do this. And this is the absolute connection between Israel and the United States. And I invite everybody to today go to my Facebook page, Barbara Sofer, and you'll see a wonderful video on healing that we made. We just posted it today, using the biblical phrase that's in that we're reading it this week in the Torah, and in America it'll be next week. Elna Rafana La. Moses prayed for his sister Miriam. And it's now a prayer for healing. It's for Jews, for non-Jews. It's for everybody. We all need healing. And I really, go to my Facebook page. You'll see it. You can click on it. You'll see the gorgeous Chagall windows. And you'll feel as if you're right here with us in Israel. And I want to send again my prayers for healing. Healing in every way. From here, from the beautiful and spiritual city of Jerusalem.
And so it's wonderful to have you. And I just want you to say a specific hello and greetings to your friends from Colchester, my town.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking of Henny Simon, who's gone, who you knew, the Slopak family. I'm thinking of the Roz Plotkin, who will be watching, and Selma Nierenstein and Anita Levine and the Broders and all the people that were wonderful family friends when you were growing up. Please give a greeting to them, a final greeting, and also to all your friends in Connecticut, Hadassah. I know our president, Alana Fodeman, is here. Karen Blaustein is the president of our Eastern Connecticut chapter that I'm a member of, and we're proud of all of them. Give us a nice greeting to sign off.
I want to say, shalom to you all. I invite you all to come and visit me. I want to say a special shalom to my classmates and those of you who's made a special effort so that I could take part in the a reunion, and look forward to the next reunion. And I miss you all. And I, again, to my sisters in Hadassah and to my cousins and to my whole family, I have very, very, very warm feelings from my childhood in Connecticut. And it's been a wonderful bridge from Colchester to Jerusalem. So thank you so much, Sheila, for making this happen. Really, thank you so much.
Barbara, it's been great. And I want to hope everyone will be watching here or on YouTube or on the TV Comcast show. Barbara, goodbye to you. Wonderful time with you. And we'll see everybody next time on Talkback. Goodbye. Thanks
next
again,
year in
Barbara.
Jerusalem.
Bye.
See you soon.
Next
Bye-bye.
year in Jerusalem. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.